Today I'm going to show you how to work with dialogues in the model view model pattern and Windows Presentation Foundation. And we're going to take a look at an existing very simple project that we have. So I have a window and I have a button on that window that when clicked will invoke a display message command, and that command is defined on this particular view's view model. So let's go look at the view model briefly. So it's a very simple class. We have our display message command, which we instantiate in the class constructor, and it's an action command, which I've included the code for that in this project, but most MVVM frameworks will have something similar, either called delegate command is another popular name for it. And essentially we'll just invoke a display message method. And you might see code like this in some projects you're working on, where to display our dialog, we create the dialog's view model in code, and then we create the associated view. Now this dialog window would be an actual WPF window, and then we would set the data context of that window to the view model for that. And then there's a direct call to the show dialog method of the view. So there's a couple problems with this approach. Number one, we've coupled our view model to the view, which kind of violates the principles of model view model, the pattern. And two, we've lost our ability to write a unit test for this, because if there were a unit test being called, it would actually show a dialog with the way the code is written currently, and that won't work. So what we're going to do is we're going to solve this problem by introducing a dialog service, and I'm going to show you how to do that. And it's going to provide the testability. It's going to decouple the view model and the view. So the first thing we need to do is we know that the actual complex dependency we need to get rid of is this dialog window. Having another view model in this view model does not violate the pattern. So to do that, there's a couple things that we know we need to abstract away. And we're going to do that by defining an interface where we can provide different implementations. And we're going to call this iDialog. And we're going to create a variety of interfaces and classes to build this dialog service, and you'll kind of see it all come together towards the end. I'll do my best to explain everything we're doing. So this first interface really is going to be implemented by the WPF window, and what we need to abstract out is the data context, because our dialog service is going to need a way to set that value. The second thing we need to abstract away is the dialog result. And the third thing is, unfortunately, we do need to define the owning window for this. That way, when you show a dialog, your main application window is the window that owns that. Another thing we need to look at is the ability to close the window. And then lastly, the actual ability to show the window. So these are the basic necessities for a dialog in the MVVM pattern. So the next part that we're going to do is actually create our dialog service and what that might look like. So the first thing we're going to do is define another interface. And we know that we want to do two things. One, I don't want to have to new up a new instance of the view. So we're going to actually provide some type of registration. So we're going to say I want to be able to register view models and associate them with views. And the thing about that is basically we're going to say show dialog and specify view model, and this dialog service is going to know which view to display. So to do that, we need two generic parameters, one for the view model, one for the view. And then we need to provide some constraints, and this is where the rest of the dialog service is going to start to get built out. So the first constraint is going to be where tViewModel is going to implement a iDialog request close interface, because we need some way for the view model to communicate to this dialog service when the view should be closed. The next constraint that we want to add is for the view. And we know that the view should implement our iDialog interface. And we'll go back and create some of these here in a moment. So the next thing we want this to do is we need to be able to actually show a dialog. So we're going to define our show dialog method. And of course, we want to be able to specify the view model that we're showing the dialog for. And we want to be able to give it an instance of the view model, because typically you're going to create the instance of the view model in your code, but you don't want to be responsible for the creation of its associated view. And the same thing, we're going to constrain this where tViewModel implements the iDialog request close interface. So these couple of things, the dialog service is what we're going to actually use to do that work. The iDialog interface provides support for displaying the windows. And the next thing we need to do is actually define iDialog request close. And that's going to be really simple. We just want to expose an event that our view model would invoke. And we're going to need to create some event arguments for this, because we're going to need to have our view model say, what should the dialog results be when closing this? So we want to basically create some new dialog close requested event args. And then we're going to go create that class as well. So right now we're just kind of writing out all the framework code per se to make this possible. And this one's pretty simple. We just want to be able to specify a dialog result. Okay, so we have our interfaces, we kind of have the definitions of things that we want to abstract away. Now we can actually build our implementation of the dialog service. So we're going to go ahead and do that here as well. So registering the dialog will be pretty straightforward. Basically, we want to specify or store some mappings of a view model to its associated view. We need to be able to store the owning window. That's going to basically be the owner of all dialogs that are displayed in the application. So to do this, we're going to start there. We're going to specify the owner, and we're going to take this in through a constructor. Really only need it as a reference. And now we need a way to map view models to views. So really we're going to use a dictionary for this. And we're going to work off of reflection using type information. So now that we have the ability to map a type of something to a type of something, we're going to do that in our register method. And the first thing that we're going to do is add a check to see, do our mappings contain a view model already, tViewModel specifically. And if the mappings do contain that, we're just going to throw a new exception, because it wouldn't be valid to map a view model to different types of views in the way that we're designing this. And we're going to try and provide a very structured error message to the caller, so if they do happen to try to register a view model twice, we can tell them exactly what the issue there will be. Just like so. And now that we have our error checking in there, basically we can go ahead and add the mapping down here if they haven't already registered it. Just like so. So the registration side of things is pretty straightforward. Showing the dialog is a little bit more involved. So the first thing that's going to happen here is we know that the caller is going to give us an instance of some kind of view model that implements the iDialog request close interface, and we're going to try and use the mappings to find which view that view model is associated with, and we're going to new that up, set the data context to the view model, display it appropriately, and respond to the close events accordingly, as well as deal with the dialog result. So this is going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to find the view type. So our key is the view model. And then we're going to use our dialog interface. And we're going to create a new instance of that view. And then from there, we need to subscribe to the closed requested event, so that way when the view model that's passed into the method requests that the view be closed, we can respond to that and close the view accordingly. And we're going to do something kind of interesting here. We're going to actually set up the handler, and then when the handler is called, we're actually going to unsubscribe from the event, because once we close the view, we don't need to listen for that anymore. So we're going to remove the handler once the event is called. Then what we can do is we can actually check the dialog result to see if it has value. And if it does, we can actually take our view and set the dialog result accordingly to the event argument that'll be provided by the view model. And this will make a little bit more sense once we actually show how this code will be used in our view model class. And then here, if there is no dialog result provided to us, because in WPF you can have true, false, or null, we would just close the dialog instead of setting the dialog result. Now down here, we're going to go ahead and actually do the subscription to that handler we just created. So when the view model fires that event, we'll know about it, and then we unsubscribe, close the view, and we no longer need that. Now down here, this is where we actually want to go ahead and set the data context, and this is why defining that in our interface was so important. So they're going to give us a view model, and we're going to go ahead and automatically assume that they want that to be the data context. Now this is just one design. You can design your dialog service differently if needed. And then of course the final thing is we're going to change the owner, so that way those dialogs always belong to the main application window, or whichever owner is provided to the dialog service. And then lastly, we're going to return the actual dialog result back from this method. So that's our actual implementation. Pretty short and sweet. You can actually write unit tests for this service as well. So now that we have all of that written out, we can utilize this and eliminate a lot of the areas of code that are coupled to the actual view. So the first place we're going to go is our app.xaml. And typically, I always use the onStartup method in a WPF application, and I'll new up my view model and my main view. And in this part of your program, that's typically okay, and then we'll call a show dialog. So what we're going to do a little bit differently is we're going to go ahead and create an instance of our dialog service. And we're going to specify our main window as the owner. And then in here, we can actually register our views. So we're going to register our existing dialog view model to our dialog window view that we have. And our dialog window view is pretty simple as well. It's just a window with a text block and 2 buttons. And typically in the current code where we create the dialog window directly in the view model, closing the dialog, we would typically use the click events of the buttons instead of binding to a command, and then we would use the code behind to set the dialog result appropriately. So all of this code will go away in favor of the dialog service. Now, we have an error right now registering this because we've not implemented any of those interfaces on these classes yet. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So on the dialog view model, we know that this needs to implement iDialog request close, which is pretty straightforward. We're going to get our close requested event. Now we also need to create some new commands for the buttons to bind to, and we're going to get rid of that code. And let's go ahead and do that now, because it'll be pretty straightforward. So we're going to define 2 commands. We're going to define an OK command. And we're also going to define a cancel command. And we're going to go ahead and new these up here. So we're going to say equals new action command. And we're going to say, we're going to invoke the close requested event. And then for this, we know that the dialog result for setting OK would be true. And then for our cancel command, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to give it a false dialog result. So pretty straightforward. So there's our few coding changes there. And now we can go ahead and swap our buttons over to bind directly to those commands. So we're going to remove the click events in favor of commands, OK command, and then cancel command. Like so. And now we can remove the code behind. Okay. So now let's go back to our app.xaml. So now our view model implements iDialog request close. Now we need to implement iDialog on dialog window. Now when we do this, you'll notice that there's really nothing actually for us to implement because the members of this interface are already part of the window class. We just pulled some of it out into an interface. So you actually, other than indicating that it implements the interface, there's no other code to write, which is great. So now our registration works, and we can go ahead and leave the rest of this code the same. And now we can go to our other view model and actually utilize that code. And to do that, we need to actually be able to pass in our dialog service to our main window view model through the constructor. That way it has an instance of it. Now typically you can use a dependency injection container or something of that to make this work. We're just going to do this by passing it from our app class. So, and then we'll go to our app.xaml CS, and now we need to pass our dialog service in through dependency injection. And then now down here, we can basically remove the view code. We don't need that anymore. We're still going to keep our view model, except instead, we're going to change this to dialog service show dialog. And we're going to pass in our view model. And then that will use the mappings, new up a new instance of the view, associate it with the data context, and return that back to us. We'll go ahead and try and build this, make sure we didn't miss any steps. There we go. And we go ahead and run it. There's our dialog. There's the cancel event. there's OK. So we can set a breakpoint and look at our results to make sure they all match up. So the OK, we should have a value of true, and we do. And then when we hit cancel, we should have a value of false, and we do. So we've decoupled the view model and view, and we're kind of facilitating more of a pure MVVM pattern here. Now the other advantage that we get out of this is the testability. So I'm not actually going to write unit tests in this video. We're going to go ahead and stop here in a second. But I did include in the demo project an example of a unit test that you might write. And a very simple unit test. So in this case, our display message command, we want to make sure that it actually calls the code that would show our message dialog, but we don't actually want it to show a dialog. So we're going to verify the behavior that the method is called rather than verifying that the dialog actually gets showed, because that would kind of break our unit test, having a dialog open up during the test run. So I used mock, MOQ, as the mocking framework of choice for this. So it's installed the NuGet package, but I only wrote one unit test, and you can run with that and write some others. So that's all there is to working with dialogs in WPF and MVVM. You can use this in a wide variety of ways. You can extend the dialog service to do other things, but it's a great way to not new up actual view instances from your view models. Source code will be in the description below, and if you enjoyed the video, definitely give a thumbs up.